Today is Thursday, July 3rd, 2014, and this is the beginning of an interview with Mr. Carl Cooley at his home at 1840 Morrison Road in Fremont, Ohio. Mr. Cooley is 89 years old, having been born on January 7th, 1925. My name is Julie Miley, Manuscripts Assistant for the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Center, and I will be conducting this interview. Now, Mr. Cooley, can you state for the record what war and branch of service and the years that you served, please?
World War II, from 1943 to June the 7th, 1943, until February the 11th, 1946.
Okay. And do you serve in the United States Army?
In the United States Army, the 26th Infantry Division, based in Boston, Massachusetts, and they had a long history of being in a National Guard outfit. From some parts they could trace even back to probably the Civil War.
Really? Wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
But they were a National Guard outfit.
Originally?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, they are still in existence. I have a grandson that graduated from the Citadel.
Wow.
And I went down for his graduation and was privileged to take his first salute because he opted for the Army, 4 years in the Army and 4 years in the reserve afterwards. And some of his friends were there from Boston, and they were still in the Yankee Division, the YD. And I got to chat with them. It was quite an interesting deal.
Oh, that's neat. That's a good story. Now, when you entered the military, were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I was drafted.
Okay.
I turned 18 on January the 7th, 1943. I had to get a deferment to finish high school. Otherwise, I would have been drafted out of high school.
Really?
And I graduated on June the 2nd, 1943. June the 7th, I took my physical in Toledo. Mm-hmm. And June the 21st, I was in active duty in Fort Ben Harrison, Indiana.
Wow. That's pretty quick.
Real quick. but almost 75% of my class, we were all on the same bus, Ross and St. Joe, to go to Toledo to take our physicals. They had a whole group of us at one time.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember your first days of basic training? Was it sort of a culture shock for you?
Well, basically, we went to Fort Ben Harrison first. We had sort of an indoctrination program.
Okay.
And they issued your uniforms, which they didn't fit the best, but they did make sure your shoes fit.
That's important.
Right. And then I went to Camp Croft in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And it was a new experience because, you did what you were told. You didn't have too much time to think for yourself, although eventually that was one of the things I think in the United States Army we were taught to think for ourselves. And the chain of command basically was set up so if a lieutenant got killed, a sergeant could take over and so on down the line. And that was one of the things about the United States Army. We were trained that no matter who you were, eventually you could be in command. Maybe not everybody, but...
Mm-hmm. That's a good explanation. That's, out of all the interviews I've done, that's the first time I've heard that. And mm-hmm. I think that's a very good explanation on that. How long was your basic training?
13 weeks.
13 long weeks?
13 long weeks. I mean, you learn to hike, you learn to march, you learn to do this. Well, I think I had one interesting experience.
Okay.
They wanted to know if anybody would know anything about boxing. Well, I'd fiddle around a little high school, not too much. So they decided to make me a boxer. And the nice part of it, got a nice training table, so on and so forth. But the first bout I went into, there were 3-round bouts. And I fought against a man. Well, I got a draw out of it. He'd fought in the helped train some of the Olympics in Chicago, and I'd never been in a ring in my life, but I got a draw out of it. And then the next one was even more so. They put 4 guys in a ring, blindfolded, and they have these big pillow gloves. Then they just come out and you come out swinging. It's hilarious to watch. And then, but what you don't know, the referee has a long pole with a glove on it. And all of a sudden, maybe somebody behind me poked me behind the head, and so I assumed somebody had to take a swing. And of course, you get whacked a couple of times too. But anyway, I decided that after that boxing wasn't for me.
Oh my God!
But we went through the typical, after basic, infiltration, the obstacle course, and the one where the barbed wire about this high off the ground, they're shooting live ammunition over top you, and you crawl underneath this for, I don't know, maybe 100 yards, and to teach you to keep your rear end down.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. Were you able to keep in contact with your family during that time, or did you pretty much just were focused on what you were doing down there?
No, we could write back and forth. Of course, back then there wasn't that much telephone conversation around. We had one when I was in high school, but basically where I was at, we didn't, other than we wrote letters back and forth, and I did do that.
Okay. Did you have any other siblings that were in the military or anything like that?
No, my sister was older and my brother was younger. I had my sister's husband. She married before he went in.
Okay.
And he was in anti-aircraft, and he was over in the Fiji Islands.
Oh.
And they were slated, if we actually had to go in and attack Japan, they were slated to go in and put up the searchlights and everything for the attack, which would have been a very, very difficult, serious thing.
Oh my gosh.
But fortunately for all of us, President Truman had the intestinal fortitude to drop the atom bombs. No matter what a lot of people thought about it, if you were in the military, I think you were happy to see it.
You feel like that was a necessary...
I don't think we had any choice.
No?
The Japanese were dug in, and already they proved that. And, going through the islands, and they were dug in, they couldn't get them out. And how many years after the war was it? They found 2 more that didn't even know the war was over. Many years after, and these were old men.
Wow.
But fortunately, I was in Germany, where at least the Germans were civilized to a degree. Anyhow.
Okay. Where'd you go after? Where's the first place you went after you were done with your basic training?
I went to the University of Connecticut in Storrs, Connecticut. They're the ones that got all the big basketball teams now.
Oh.
Girls basketball team, Storrs, Connecticut. And it was called the Army Specialized Training Program. They were going to train us to be engineers. Unfortunately, I didn't have the subjects in high school. I took a trades course, which was machine shop and this. Basic math. I had no algebra or anything like that. So I wouldn't have made it, but the program folded up. And everybody that, except for a few, if you opted for medical school, they would let you out. But then you could go to medical school while you were during the war.
Really?
But then after you got out, you opted for so many years of government service as a doctor.
Okay.
In fact, one of the fellows I graduated did that, and he didn't make it. But he spent 4 years as an Army doctor after he got out of all the training,
Wow.
Of course, his training was free.
Yeah, that's a hard offer to pass up.
But that's when I joined. Then from there, we'd been sleeping in steam-heated dormitories and all this. Well, then I joined the 26th Infantry Division in Camp Campbell, Kentucky on January the 11th. That would have been 1944.
Okay.
And after sleeping in the steam-heated barracks, we were out in the field the first 11-day field problems, and then we left there and went on Tennessee maneuvers for 65 days and it rained 54 out of the 65 and snowed 2. But this is where you were actually training. You were mock fighting the enemy. I mean,
Okay.
you were all Americans, but you had red forces and you had blue forces, and it was an actual combat training. Mm-hmm. Except you were using blanks instead of live ammunition, of course.
Wow. Okay.
And then after that, we left, and the 26th put us in trucks, and we went down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And there we spent our overseas training. And we were given a rifle. I mean, I qualified on the machine gun. I qualified on the M1 rifle. Basically, my MOS was rifleman.
Okay.
And then before I went overseas, I also qualified as a sniper.
Wow.
But we had a sergeant qualified at higher than I did, so he got the sniper rifle.
They only issue so many?
One to a company.
Oh, really?
And he got
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he got the sniper rifle. Just before we went into actual combat in France, he was a sergeant, one of the old Sergeant Hydutis, a Greek sergeant, and he was from the old National Guard outfit yet. And he said, Hydutis is no fool. He ditched the sniper rifle and got himself an M1. Well, you get caught with a sniper rifle, there's no mercy.
They take you out?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Well, because, you're there picking at them. I mean, we've had that happen to us where the snipers were up in a tree someplace, and they just, all day long, they were trying to pick guys off and end up for them, So if they got caught, they were dead meat. That's all there is to it. But anyway, after 6 months in Fort Jackson, they put us on the train and took us up to New York. And we were in barracks, I think, overnight, and the next morning we loaded on it was a luxury liner Saturnia. It was the Italian luxury liner Saturnia. And they had it all outfitted as a troop ship.
Really?
We marched on the troop ship, and we were the first division. They went from the United States to France, without first going through England. All the other convoys went to England first.
Now why were you guys the first ones?
Well, the harbors weren't clear or anything else. In fact, even when we went, you could see mines floating, but they had channels through to land, and we landed in Cherbourg Harbor.
Really?
And everybody said, "What are you guys doing here? The war's over, I mean, the CBs, all these people working the docks." And so we were in Cherbourg for, I think, almost 3 weeks. And they said, "Stack your gas mask." But we carried those things all over,
Yeah.
They were a nuisance because they were big, bulky under your arm.
Mm-hmm.
So we stacked our gas masks, and then the next day they put us in trucks, and we went through Paris, and then we hiked someplace, and they said, "Well, dig in, we're army of occupation."
Yeah.
Well, I got my foxhole, just got my external out, was getting ready to heat my sea rations, and the shells started coming in. We lost 3 men. That night, we moved up over the hill, and the 4th Armored Division moved out, and we were on the front line in a holding position for a week. We took over their foxholes. Mm-hmm. In the daytime, we couldn't even come out because the Germans had us zeroed in. In the night, 2 out of every squad had to go back and get your rations for your squad. And we had a man in our squad, his name was Farber, 40 years old. He had a daughter graduating high school, and the poor guy he was beside himself. In fact, we got back to see how to get a ration. He broke down and cried. So I told the CO about it, and so they kept him back. So I went back by myself with the squad. I found my way. Don't ask me how. But anyway, I think it was 4 or 5 days later, and they set him back up, which is too bad. Well, then after a week on the holding, we pulled back for about a week, and then the 26th, we started the attack.
Now, what attack do you remember? Do you have a specific name for this attack?
Well, this is part of that campaign I was telling you about.
Okay.
There. We were heading, trying to, well, actually it was a campaign for Nancy and Metz,
Okay.
literally. And as I say, we were attacked. I can remember one time we started across this open field, and one of these snipers was picking at us. Well, we got to a high railroad embankment. We circled around. We caught him in a tree. Unfortunately, we had to take him out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we had a big farmhouse, and it was a little humor, but there were great big cabbages about this big in a farmhouse, and we found some German soldiers hiding in there, and underneath these big cabbages, and we got them out. We laughed, but in World War I, they called the German krauts.
Yeah.
So we were pulling krauts out of the cabbage patch. It's just, humor's all you need, all you could get.
Yep, in those situations,
Right.
Definitely.
But I got ahead of myself. We had when the first time we went into the attack, I have no idea the name of the town or anything else. But there was a colored tank battalion out of Fort Hood, Texas.
Okay.
And they brought them in, and we went in the attack with them. And they ended up distinguishing themselves throughout the war. They lost 3 tanks that day. But a couple of our guys rode these tanks in, and they lost their lives. We lost 4 or 5 people in our company that day, but I was first scout. So we hit this town. I went around the end of this town and building, and I was peeking around the corner of a building, and all of a sudden I was sitting down. A German sniper was in the church steeple, and he put a bullet between my helmet and the brick building and knocked me down. I had a crease in my helmet about that long, about that deep. But close doesn't count. And our first guy came up, he said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "I think so."
You're probably like, my head's still there. So.
Yeah. Well, I was in the church steeple, and he knocked the sniper out of the church steeple.
Oh, he got him then?
He got him. No mercy for snipers, as I was saying. But from then on, we were attacking the Germans. We were pushing them, right along. We never retreated. Our 26 never retreated.
Really?
And I was just trying to think what came along next. Well, you got any more questions right now?
I mean, I can throw some at you unless you want to. Unless you have a storyline you want to keep going with. It's up to you.
Well, we had another battle that we were in, that we were chasing the Germans, and we had a big line of pine trees, and I was first scout. They sent me through, and I went through, and I thought I spotted a German. We shot at each other, but I went back and reported to the CO that we were pushing the Germans. Well, we got this farmhouse, and we captured 150 Germans.
150?
And our captain we have it called rifle grenades. You put a grenade in your rifle,
Okay.
and you put your rifle down like this and launch it. And there was a German tank there with an open turret, and he lobbed this rifle grenade right inside that
Really?
tank. I mean, it's lucky, and that thing exploded all night long. But we were in a holding position, and I remember we stopped, and they brought us our mail we hadn't had in 3 or 4 days. In fact, I think we were a couple of days before we even got any rations. And I found a loaf of old German brown bread on one of the trucks. It tasted pretty good.
I'm sure anything would at that time.
But anyway, we captured, I'd say about 150 of them there. And we were in a holding position. I got a package from the church and had a nice shoe shine kit in it. And I'm in mud from the ankles down. I would say you could find some humor no matter what. And I remember that night they told me, they said, "Well, Cooley, you can sleep tonight. Some of these younger guys can stand up and take guard." Well, then about midnight they got me up and said, we got to go out on patrol. And it's not me, they told me I could sleep. Well, the new guys were crying, and a couple of the old guys broke down, so I had 2 or 3 hand grenades in my pocket and some bandoliers of ammunition, and we went down the road for about 2 miles and set up an outpost, just to make sure the Germans weren't coming in. And then every 2 hours somebody had to report back. Well, I'm 18 years old, 19 by now. Mm-hmm. And so I had to go back every 2 hours, and that was a lonely walk. And I got back to the CO where all of a sudden somebody says, "Halt, who goes there? What's the password?" And you don't shout the password out loud. And to this day, I don't know how I got up to that young man. But one of the rookies, he's walking guard just like he's in the United States. He was supposed to be sitting in the ditch alongside of a tree. And he had his finger on the trigger, and the safety was off. And I said, I think I come closer to getting it then than I ever did from the Germans.
Oh my gosh.
And so I guess that lasted for 2 hours. And in fact, I came in about 5 in the morning, and a weapons company had moved in. And I saw one of their trucks, and they had a package of D bars. These are chocolate bars. One chocolate bar was like a whole meal. Mm-hmm. So I owned that pack of D bars, and everybody in my squad got a D bar for breakfast.
Aww.
But yeah, we hit another house where we had a bunch of Germans in it, and they wouldn't come out. They were afraid to come out. So we brought our BARs up, 3 of them, Browning automatics, mm-hmm. and they aimed on that. They cut a window out, and one of the fellows went up and lobbed a hand grenade in, and they came out. And I'll bet you some of them went over 15, 16 years old. Some men in their 50s, they were scared to death. But the best thing ever happened to them, we captured them. They were out of it then.
Now, when you guys took prisoners, where did you take the prisoners
They moved them back to the rear echelon.
Okay.
And a lot of them ended back up in England.
Really?
Oh, I'll come to that part later.
Okay.
And then we were up around the 19th of November, and that's when we jumped off about 6 o'clock in the morning. And we went up this hill, and Germans hit us with machine guns. Went across this plowed field. We hit this heavy force, and they hit us with these 88s, and the shells were coming down, spraying coming in. I got shrapnel on my left knee, and so I moved back. Of course, and some of the people, in fact, our platoon leader, I saw him in the hospital. He told me, he said, well, actually, there's 20 of them on their feet. Of course, a lot of them were like me and like him. A tree fell across his back, and he was walking around. And but when we were in the actual still combat, I moved over to the corner of the forest, and there were, I think, probably 10 or 12 guys with me who were wounded. But we laid there for 24 hours because the Germans had us pinned down. Medics couldn't get to us.
Were you guys short on supplies, like ammo and anything?
No, they brought me a machine gun.
Did
I was qualified, so if the Germans counterattacked us, we had in fact, I had 3 bandoliers of ammunition hanging around my neck. I had a belt with ammunition in it, and then I had 3 or 4 hand grenades in my pocket, and we were pretty well, as far as ammunition, I think we were well set. Okay. But then we were laying there, and one of the guys, all of a sudden a shell came in, and it tore off the side of my helmet. My ear.
Yours?
Mine, yeah, it tore off the side of my helmet, shrapnel. And it felt like my ear I swear I lost my ear, but I didn't. But on my shoulder, it was just like a floor burn, when you...
Like a rug burnish?
Yeah.
Really?
And, but then we were 24 hours, and they brought us back, put us in the hospital, in the field hospital, did surgery on my knee. Then we ended up in Paris, and in fact, I was Thanksgiving in a Paris hospital. And we had one guy had stomach trouble, and he couldn't eat his Thanksgiving meal. The other guy ate ours and split his.
There's that humor you need.
And then after that, they flew us back to England. Mm-hmm. And I was in the hospital there for almost 3 months. And that in rehab, and my feet started to burn and hurt. And so they checked them out, and they said, well, you got trench foot. I had no feeling in my feet from the ankles down. Because, well, the feet were wet and muddy for days, weeks on end, you know. Mm-hmm. And so then I went to the separation center where they tell you where you're going to go. Well, they put me on limited assignment, so I didn't have to go back to the front. Had it been for my feet, I'd have been back in the Battle of the Bulge. But so they kept me there. Then I worked in this center for. The captain said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "How about the Air Force?" He said, "What they got you can do?" I said, "What the Army got I can do?" Why? He said, "You got a pretty good IQ. How about staying here and work for me for a clerk?" So I spent 3 months in Birmingham, England.
Really?
And as a clerk, I mean, eating 3 meals a day, going to town whenever I felt like it. And, well, then they put us in, the war had ended, so they put us in trucks, took us down to southern England, and then up in Blackpool, England, which is on the Black Sea. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like a Cedar Point, poor Cedar Point for the poor people. Richmond went down to Bournemouth. And so they put us in called the Wharton American Technical School. While guys were waiting home, they had machine shops, all kinds of different trades that these guys could study while they were waiting shipment home. And so they put us in convoy to go from southern England to northern England. And they put me down as an assistant Jeep driver. Well, I hadn't driven anything since I left high school, or since I left the Army, really. And but the Jeep driver come in and he was hungover, so I got to drive that Jeep. Man, that was great for me. So anyway, I drove the Jeep all the way up, and then I was cadre in this Wharton American Technical School. I worked in publications. We did all the passes and everything like that, issued them, and I had a good friend of mine, a young Jewish boy, and he could sign the captain name better than a captain could. And we'd take a 3-day pass, and we went to Scotland, and we went to London, and I saw the changing. I saw a lot of things I would never have seen. But you're talking about the German prisoners. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of them that came back. They were back in England, and they were actually working in this camp. They did all the KP, they did the cleanup afterwards.
Really?
And 4 of them worked in this place where I worked. Well, they put me first started put me in charge of the mimeograph section. Mm-hmm. I didn't know a mimeograph machine from a typewriter, but I learned to run one. Well, then they gave me 2 German prisoners, and they learned to run them. These guys could do anything. And they helped in the printing. Well, then the people in charge of printing, their points came up, so you wrote a point system. Mm-hmm. And I had 57 points, and I thought I needed one more battle start. I would have had enough to get home earlier, but as it was, I was in the Army almost a year after I got home. And before the war, I worked at Spiel Dinners as a stock boy, delivery boy, and some sales. Mm-hmm. Well, I got home on February the 11th, 1946. On a Friday. I went down to Lidl's, bought some clothes, stopped at Spiel Dinners, and on Monday the 13th I went back to work.
When you got the word that you were coming home, did your parents know you were coming?
Mm-hmm. They didn't know exactly when. Okay. Because we were on came home on a battle wagon, Augusta. And it was on its last run. It would have been a battle wagon in World War I, and he used it for a troop ship in World War II. And it's one of those when you see them, they're like this.
Did you get seasick?
I had 2 meals, one down, one up. It took us 3 days to get home. In fact, the Queen Mary left the same time we did, and she only beat us in by a few hours.
Really?
Yeah, they were going to decommission it. This was the last run for this battle wagon, and we were in a storm, and man, we had 30-foot waves. We were in a loud deck. And but we landed in New York, and they talk about know how the Vietnam veterans were treated bad, and they didn't know parade. Well, we didn't have parades when we landed. We were the first ones that came home. They got the parades and everything, but we got their Red Cross met us with milk and donuts, and that tasted good enough to me. Well, they put up some barracks, and we got a steak dinner that night. 2 days later, we went to Pennsylvania, Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, and that's a separation center.
Okay.
And so they went through all the program and everything, and we had a room of about 100 guys there, all ex-combat veterans, and they tried to get you to re-sign up, you know. Not one man out there signed up. And the guy said, "What's the matter with you guys?" One guy says, "The government's got anything to do with it. I don't want any part of it. Just let's get out of here." So I got bus tickets got as far as Cleveland,
Okay.
and then went to Norwalk for a bus there. Came home from Norwalk, and I stayed from there the 11th. Got home the 11th of February, went to work on the 13th, and I worked for Spieldeners till I was 65 years old. And that was, I don't know if you remember or not, but from Justice Street, State Street, there must have been 10 or 12 stores. That was called the Miley Block.
Really?
Yeah. And we were,
I didn't know that.
and we were renting from the Mileys.
Oh, okay.
And when I first started for Paul, we worked for the Mileys. I worked rented from them. And then Paul bought the building down the corner of Arch, and he bought that. He couldn't get in it for a while because of the liquor store had a lease on it, and they couldn't break the lease until they changed the politics, they forgot to renew it. And then he was able to get it, and then he bought the pool room and a bar, 2 bars there, and put the parking lot in.
Never knew that.
Yeah, it's called the Miley Block. Dick Kroll Miley was the older one. Then there were Dick, Bob. They were sons of Kroll. And most of the Mileys now are descendants from them.
Okay.
And of course, these people are a little older than I was, but they were, and all good people. Of course, you wouldn't agree to that.
Married into it, so. Yeah. Wow. Okay. When you were over there, did you have any good luck charms or anything, like Bibles or anything that you kept?
We used to have a little testament. I always had that with me.
Did you?
You know, they say there's no ages in a foxhole. I mean, there's a lot of experience that you went through, that mud, and I can remember one night we were guarding a machine gun, and we put down one raincoat, and we had every bit of clothing we had on us. 2 of us laid down that raincoat and covered up with another one. This was in November, snow on the ground, and they're telling that, and that all contributed to your French foot, wet feet. And somebody suggested, well, why don't you sit on the edge of your foxhole and you and your buddy rub your feet? Well, if we'd found the guy at the end of an M1, he probably wouldn't have made another suggestion. You know, you're being shelled, you know. You're in danger all the time, you know. It's just not a happy situation. I would not give you anything for the experience. But neither would I want to do it again.
I always ask that question, you know, looking back at it, would you do it again?
Well, I would, if under the same circumstances. In World War II, we were attacked. And almost any young man was ready to go. A good friend of mine, when we went for our physicals, he had a hernia and they rejected him. He had it fixed and enlisted. But you know, everybody, you want to be a part of it because we were attacked. Or Korea, Vietnam, we should never have been in there. We got into stuff we had no business in. We shouldn't have been in Iraq, we shouldn't be in Afghanistan, but that's, if, you know, as say, the Japanese hit us at Pearl Harbor, sunk a good many of our ships, fortunately somewhere out there, and people had no idea what the American people were like.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to come back out of it and didn't have enough men to run the factory, so the women rode the river and all this, you know.
Yeah.
And ever since then, they've been able to do their part as much as anybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you bring back any souvenirs, anything like that?
Very, very little. I think I've got a German gun cleaning kit,
Okay.
and I might have some German coins, English coins. I spent about a year, almost a year in England, that was enjoyable, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I traveled England and
Okay.
got to see a lot of things I would never have seen, I think. But as far as actual souvenirs, you really didn't have any place to put them.
Okay.
And a lot of those that brought them back were there when the war ended. But see, I was in England. I'd been out of combat for almost a year.
Do you remember the day you found out, or when you first heard that the war was over and you got to go home? Do you remember that feeling? Like,
Well, see, when I got to, we were great because, you know, all the black house ended because all the towns in England were blacked out.
oh, still?
Well, once the war ended, then the blackout ended, but they didn't end the blackouts until the war was officially declared over in Germany
Oh, okay.
and England. Of course, with Japan, they were still going on. In fact, some of our boys that were in combat were shipped over, and they were going to ship them over to Japan.
Oh, they had to go over to the Pacific Theater then?
And some of them got as far as California, and the Japanese war ended. But you know, some of them would have been in it again. Well, because these are all well-trained men. But I can remember we had a man in this town, Bernie Baker. He was a painter, and he went up through. Of course, he's no longer living, but he went up through Africa, up through Italy, all the way through Germany, through the whole war, and never got hit. You know, you can imagine what that would have to be like.
Yeah,
And there's some, and of course, a lot of them went through there and never got hit. I mean, we had some friends that went over. They got out there just in time for the Battle of the Bulge. If I hadn't got hit and declared limited assignment, I would have been in the Battle of the Bulge. Because Patton had already taken care of his end down here, and the Bulge came along. They pulled Patton and all his divisions up north, and he stopped the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow. Okay.
But that had to be another entirely different experience, you know.
Okay. Did you guys have any downtime while you were there? Or was it pretty much a constant barrage of combat? Did you ever step back from the front lines?
Oh, you get back in reserve for maybe a week.
Okay.
But still, you were within range of the long guns. You were never out of completely danger. Because you'd have a point company and two here. Then this would pull back and this one would be back. And this would pull back and this would be back. I mean, but you were always within combat range. And in fact, if the miles, I remember one time we were in reserve, they pulled in portable showers. And this was before we actually got to the front line. This was in, what was it, July, August or September. And you walked about 2 or 3 miles to portable showers, and you just get in the shower, get soaked up, and it'd blow a whistle. You had to rinse, and it'd blow a whistle, and you were out. If you didn't, they shut the water out. And I think that was the only one time. And then a couple of times I got to take a bath on a cold stream, in October, November. But I mean, the facilities weren't there.
Yeah, you just had to do what you had to do, pretty much.
Right. Use your helmet for your canteen for a little water and wash up.
Was there ever a time that you thought you weren't going to make it back home? You knew in your heart you were going to make it?
They say there's no atheist in a foxhole.
That's a good.
Sometimes you wonder. I can remember one time a German plane were strafing us, I dropped down the foxhole, and when they went over and got back, there was a 50 caliber bullet laying right on the edge of my foxhole. So you come close, but and you don't know how many times you come close, and don't even know it,
That's very true. Wow. Did you form any close friendships while you were over there with any of your buddies?
I was definitely, no question about it. I mean, you're close to, in your particular outfit, your squad. You got 12 men on that squad, and you depend on each and every one of you. And a good friend of mine that came in, and his name was Edward J. Lubers from Texas. We called him Tex. He wrote a letter home, and I knew what it was because I spelled almost every other word for him. But he could sign his name, and it's kind of like Sergeant York. He knew how to use a rifle, and just a great guy. But I think he made it. I never lost track of him and two in my squad. But we had, I don't know how many of them that we actually were lost in combat. Two the first day we went in the attack.
Really?
Then we get rookies up, and I tell you, they were bringing people up there that should never have been in combat. They needed bodies, so they had the Air Force in England. They were training them, giving them. We were chasing the Germans, actually chasing them, and this kid was loading his M1 rifle one round at a time. And the M1 rifle, you put a clip in like this, you fired 8 rounds, it kicked out, you put another one in. And this kid, I taught him how to load his rifle when we were
on the field.
I mean, it's sad. The fact I was well trained, we were well trained. I mean, to me, this is so important.
Wow.
Because you can imagine they bring you in here at night, in the middle of the night, and put you you're on the front line, and you've never been in combat. Imagine how those boys had to feel.
That just gives me goosebumps. Well, like you said, you have those 12 guys with you, and they're dependent on you, and you're depending on them.
Right, and you're bringing guys in that don't know an M1 rifle from a machine gun. That's maybe stretching a little bit, but As I say, I spent a total of, I think, 45 to 48 days in actual combat.
Okay.
And think of some of the guys that were in for a year or so. Of course, they would pull them back for R&R or send them back to England, whatever. Yeah. But nevertheless, what was it? Roosevelt said, war is hell. And then we've trained Iraqis. Well, we're 5 years over training Iraqis. And now the first time they have to fight, they throw down their arms, get killed. So now we're sending people over to train them again. I had 13 weeks of basic and 6 months of overseas training. And these guys have had 5 years and still can't fight. There's something wrong. Afghanistan, the same thing. Mm-hmm. We pull out of Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda's going to be right back up there again. Of course, this has nothing to do with World War II.
No, but some people just don't want to be helped, and it doesn't matter what you do, they have to want it themselves too. So.
But can you imagine where World War II would have been if the United States hadn't gone in? I mean, stop and think about it. Germany was up there right where we went on D-Day. Mm-hmm. And our guys went in on D-Day. The Germans were all the way up to France. They were ready to cross the Channel into England. And if the United States hadn't gotten involved in it, we'd have been fighting them in England, probably. Fortunately for the English and the French, the Japanese bombed us.
Yeah?
Because that's what put us in a war.
That's true.
Of course, who knows, we may have been in it anyway, but that was the catalyst to put us in, though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember when they bombed Pearl Harbor? What that was like?
Mm-hmm.
I just, I've never, God willing and knock on wood, never experienced war
Right.
on land
And I
here,
hope you never have
on your
to.
homeland, exactly.
Right.
Because of you guys, obviously, and people that serve our country. So to me, to hear that happening, I mean, 9/11, but an actual bombing, like it's...
Right.
I can't even imagine.
I can't imagine, the Arizona, it's a tomb for how many people. They couldn't get them out. Well, today they could probably have done that, but, back then they didn't have the facilities or the thing to do it. So imagine the people who had loved ones on the Arizona. How do they ever get closure? But say right then and there, that's when, if I hadn't been drafted, I would have enlisted, I'm sure.
Okay.
But I finished high school. Say when I was 18 in January, I got a deferment to finish with the draft board, and they gave me a deferment. I got my on the 2nd and the 7th. I was on a bus later for a physical, and actually sworn in on the 7th. But then I was considered on inactive duty until I went to Fort Ben Harrison.
Okay.
And the first few days, I go over there in a brown gabardine suit. I'm serving kitchen duty and KP and brown. I didn't have uniforms yet, and they already had me doing KP and whatnot.
Wow.
But one thing they did make sure your shoes fit. But I got into basic training, and we had some of our, particularly our dress clothes, we had them tailored so they fit.
Oh, wow. After the war, did you keep in contact with anybody, go to reunions, anything like that? So you feel like once that war ended, you were sort of...
Yeah, well, we had lost so many of ours that the people were in the outfit really more, most of them I didn't even know.
Okay.
And I found out, I'm trying to think of the name of the town in Pennsylvania. I could find nothing on the 26th. And in a town in Pennsylvania, they have a museum of World War II. And my son was with the National Park Service for 32 years. And then he started a heritage trail over in Pennsylvania. And he had done a lot of, he had contacts with some people in Congress. And this one World War II museum, somehow or other, he got him a grant for $200,000. So he called him and asked him for a favor. And I went over there, and I'll bet you they had 2 or 3 tables, probably 20, 30 feet of tables, all with 26th Infantry Division information.
Really?
And I can't think of the name of all that. If you'd like to know it sometime, I'll find out from my son. But they had all the information, and two of my squad apparently must have made it through. And some of them made it through and they passed on since then, but I know there's a Charlie Squares and John Stereo, Shane, Patton. These boys were all killed overseas. And our platoon sergeant, he was wounded pretty bad in the first attack we went in. And, it's just, it's something different.
Do you think your experience makes your outlook on the military and war in general, has it really changed your outlook on stuff?
I wouldn't think so.
No? I
think so. I wouldn't think, other than the fact that we were in a necessary war, and today I don't feel they are.
Okay.
Just to me, we, as I say, because I'm reiterating what I said,
you're fine.
We were attacked. We would have enlisted if we hadn't been drafted. But when you turned 18, if you were physically fit, I always said if you had one eye and could see, they'd still take you.
And a trigger finger, right?
Yeah, right.
Wow, okay. So after you got back, you said you went right back to work pretty much at Spieldenders.
I got back on Friday 11th and went back to work on Monday the 13th.
Okay.
I took the weekend off. Well, I laid around England for almost a year.
Yeah.
You know,
So you're ready to get back into...
partying and one thing and another, drinking warm beer.
Warm beer, ah.
It's that way, even today.
Yeah.
They have the kegs in the basement. And it's not, of course they may have cold today, ice, I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
Back then,
Yeah.
in the pubs, we open them and we close them. Of course, they'd open at 6 and close at 8, you know. Somebody would sit down playing the piano, and guys would be singing and drinking beer.
Okay.
But I say that was an interesting experience in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I was in charge of the printing press for a while, and we made a little book. I've got that someplace that our fellows printed it, and we got our names in it, so on and so forth. But we had a power stapler that stapled the pages together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the little driver broke, so I went over to our machine shop. They had a machine shop training people, and one would fix it. Oh, they couldn't do that. I said, give me a metal and a file. So I went back and gave it one of the German prisoners. He filed that piece out, put it in, and fit perfect. I mean, these people are craftsmen. I mean, the Germans are craftsmen. Well, they are today.
Mm-hmm.
Where would our space program be without Braun?
Yeah.
You know, they're a smart people. And most of them back then, they did what they call apprenticeships.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you got out of 10, 12 years old, instead of going to school, you went to an apprenticeship. You learned a trade. And one of them that worked for his name was Carl, spelled with a K.
Ah.
And and people had mailed me letters, and they came back, and on the back of one of them says, "How are you, Carl?" Carl, with a K.
Oh, that's cute. Okay. So after you got back into town, did it feel strange to be back here? Like, did you feel like you had to like kind of reassimilate back into civilian life?
Well, few friends that I ran around with, some of them were still in.
Okay.
And so this is probably maybe an interesting story for you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a girl from Jackson Burgoon that I had dated a few times before I went in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And her folks were farmers out in Jackson Burgoon, nice people. And my friends were out, so I went out to visit them I think it was on a Saturday night. And the daughter was home. Well, she'd gotten engaged to her boyfriend originally, so. And anyway, she was in nurses training. Well, that letter, next week I got a letter from her asking if I'd like to meet a nurse. So I went to Flower Hospital and she introduced me to my wife.
That's a cute.
And that was a program that the government had going on. She was a cadet nurse.
Mm-hmm.
They went to nurse training free.
Okay.
They wore uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
They had to march and everything else like the military. And if the war had lasted, my wife would have been an Army nurse. I think it's on that tape that.
Oh, okay.
He thought it was interesting, so he interviewed her. He had never heard of that before.
Wow.
There's a Flower Hospital in Toledo. She graduated from Flower Hospital.
And that's how you met her.
Mm-hmm. So, and, well, when she introduced me, she and her boyfriend were supposed to go with us. Well, he couldn't make it, some reason or another, so we went out and almost got thrown out of the theater for talking too much. And so 66 years later, 4 kids, 10 grandchildren, and 23 great-grandkids.
Wow. Oh. That's a happy ending. Okay. I don't know if you want to answer this, but do you think you suffered from any like post-traumatic stress or any issues like that?
Absolutely not.
No?
No. Because it may be the fact that I had a year out of combat before I came home.
Okay.
And had this good friend of mine, Cy Weisberg. I met him at this separation. They didn't call it separation center. They had another name for it. But anyway, if it told you whether you're going to combat or whether what you're going to do. And I met him. He worked in his publications the same as I did. And so we got to see England. We went to Scotland, and some of my kids have been to Scotland. They've come back with some of the same pictures I had. I got to London, changing the guard, and we were outside of Blackpool, England, which was the second largest summer resort in England. They had kind of like a small Cedar Point. They had rides and all this kind of stuff, and we were right on the Black Sea. And we had trains that would take us back in and out free every time we went to go. They had a theater there. They had opera there. I mean, so really, I think we had a chance to get acclimated before I actually came home.
Okay.
I was ready to settle down and go to work.
Okay. All right.
And I came home, well, when I was with overseas training, I was a PFC. The TO, Table Operations, was completely full. I would join a National Guard outfit.
Okay.
So there was no advancements available. The sergeants,
Really?
corporals, everything full. All they had PFC openings because they had no PFC. So I got the PFC. Had I stayed in combat, I'd probably gotten a battlefield promotion.
Okay.
But once I got out of the outfit, there was no promotions where we were at. So I drew overseas pay, and they paid us $10 a month combat pay. And I got to wear the combat infantry badge. But anyway, I made $80 a month. And they had this $6.40 came out for insurance. And before I went overseas, I took out what they called a Class C allotment, $40 a month. So that came home, and my folks banked that for me. So I came home, I did have some money.
That's good.
So they would buy myself a good used car. But I say, I think the fact that I really had a year out of combat.
Okay.
And we had people coming back to the technical school who were basically, while they're waiting for points to come home, they'd come over from the continent to England and go to this school. They had a machine shop, all different things they could go to.
Okay.
And as soon as their points came up, and so I was in almost a year after the war was over. Well, it was over in February of 45, and I got home February of 46.
Wow.
Because we didn't have the shipment to come home.
Yeah.
And when I did, it was in an old battle wagon.
You were ready to come home?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, when I hit Norwalk, the bus I was supposed to get on to come home wasn't leaving for 4 hours. There was one that was leaving for, I think it was Monroeville. So I took that to Monroeville, stepped out of the bus, stuck out my thumb. The truck behind the bus picked me up, took me to Bellevue. And the truck behind that one stopped and picked me up and brought me to Fremont. Dropped me off at the old Fremont Hotel. I got a taxi, came home.
Oh my God.
I got home about 4 hours before I would have.
Hey!
But back then, if you were in uniform, they picked you up.
Yeah.
But it's an experience I wouldn't want to go through again, but I wouldn't give you anything for what I went through. You about ready to run out of questions?
Oh no. Did you have GI Bill available for you?
Yes.
When you were done, did you take advantage of that?
No, I did not.
Okay.
To begin with, in high school, I took trades course.
Yeah.
I had trades math, trades English, and the whole drawing. I had 3 hours of machine shop a day for 3 years. I was qualified to be a machinist, but I ended up being a salesman. But as I say, because I went to University of Connecticut for 3 months, and I just did not have it. I would have flunked out, but they folded the whole program. And then I ended up in the infantry. So why would I want to waste one more year, 2 more, 3 more years? I had actually 3 years coming on a GI Bill, but I was not qualified to go to college. And back then we didn't have Tech and things like that.
Could you have used that? Was it strictly for schooling, or could you use it for purchase a home though? Couldn't you? Or
no, it was really for schooling at that time. Back for college then.
Okay. Because I didn't know if there was a program for housing then too for the GIs.
Of course, I was single. I didn't need it. They had housing.
Okay.
If you, I don't, well, you wouldn't remember, obviously, but up off of Buchanan Street, there's a couple of streets, Marvin and some of those. Mm-hmm. They built veteran housing, and these were just, of course, I think I'd call them not tar paper shacks, but they're
like the cookie cutter houses. They just
but they couldn't get veterans couldn't get a house. They were married, couldn't get a place to live. Mm-hmm. But my sister and her husband had bought a little house right next to my folks before he went in the Army, and I think they bought that for $2,200 back then. And well, then my sister rented it out and moved in with my parents because her husband had to go overseas, and he came back. Well, she went to work. She worked at Spiel Vendors as a secretary. I also have a brother who worked at Spiel Vendors as an installer. Jeez. The whole family worked for Spiel Vendors.
Good company.
Well, I started working for him when I was 15. As a stock boy, I run deliveries. I got my driver's license when I was 13.
Oh my God.
You're learning stuff now. You did.
Hey, it's all good stuff.
This has nothing to do with the world.
Hey,
But anyway, I was running deliveries to Findlay, Foster, all over when I was 14 years old. So anyway, and my brother they knew I was going in the Army. My brother was going to the high school. He was 15 then. He didn't have a driver's license yet. So Paul said, "What's he doing?" He stopped in to walk home with me. I said, "Well, nothing, but he doesn't drive yet." And he said, "I'd ask if he drive." I asked if he needed a job. So my brother went to work for him. Well, during the war, they couldn't get help. So he was out helping the installers install. Wow. The time he graduated, he was a finished mechanic. And he trained a lot of others. And he ended up, I was actually there 50 years. And he had 47 or 48 years in as an installer of hands and knees, and he has no knee problems today. It's amazing. But anyway, during the war, then he asked my brother what my sister was doing. Well, she at that time I think was working for Motor Auto Parts. Mm-hmm. So she went to work for Spiel Vendors, and her high school education was stenographer.
Oh.
Because the first time he dictated a letter, he couldn't. She said, okay. She was taking shorthand, and he didn't know that. And he said, "Let me see that." She said, "That's a bunch of hen scratches." But then from then on, he got the point. He just said, "Write a letter so-and-so and tell him this." And she did it. But then she worked there till her husband came home from the Army. Well, in fact, I came home from the Army. She still was there, but then when she started her family, then she retired. Mm-hmm. But then, as I started working there, and then I had put when I was 65, 1990. I've been retired 24 years.
Wow.
And my brother retired the same year I did, only at 62.
Wow. That's cool. Good stories. You belong to any veteran organizations today? VFW, American Legion?
VFW, I'm not active in it.
No.
They had a deal several years ago where for $40 you could buy a life membership. Mm-hmm. I said, well, for that they'd play taps at my funeral, so it's worth $40.
That's a perspective to look at.
You know, after all, I've heard tap plenty. That's one of the loneliest calls you ever hear, taps.
You better believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I'll tell you, at night, especially when you're in the barracks and that taps or blow, that's one of the loneliest sounds. You talk about if someone would make you homesick, that would.
Wow. Have you ever been down to D.C. to see the memorial?
Yes, I have.
Did you do the honor flight?
No.
No. Okay.
My son lived in Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And Marion and I and our friend Saxes, we traveled a lot together in motorhomes, and my son was just staying in a campground. Mm-hmm. So we stopped to visit him, and he said, let's go see the memorial. He rented a limousine, and he took Howard, Mary Sachs, and Marion and I, and he and his wife, and we went to see the memorial. We got up, it was pouring down the rain, it was coming down in buckets. And we drove to the memorial, and he pulled in, he had a place where you could park for wounded veterans. And he pulled in, the guy let us out, the sun sign came out. And we spent almost 2 hours going to the memorial. We got back in the car and it started to rain. Rained all the way home. The lightning bolt looked like it came right off the front of that limousine. It's quite an experience, and I didn't get to see all the other monuments, but some of them, Roosevelt's, and we saw some of them, things that I probably would have seen on the honor flight. Mm-hmm. But I felt that that I had seen it, that I shouldn't take the space for someone else that had not seen it. In fact, one of the things at the high school, when some of the boys put on that for the veterans, I didn't make it last year. But one of the people with the speaker was head of the honor flight. I went up and talked to him afterwards and explained to him why I didn't do it. And he thanked me and appreciated very much the fact that. So I haven't seen honor, so I didn't go on honor flight. A friend of ours went as you have to have an assistant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he went on that. He said it was absolutely fabulous, just outstanding. And everybody talked to, do you know Barb Kowinski? She was retired from the Navy. She was a Navy nurse.
Oh, okay.
But way after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Her mother's my age, or older.
Okay.
But anyway, Barb was in the Navy as a Navy nurse on a hospital ship. She probably was there maybe during Vietnam War or sometime back then. Mm-hmm. But she's retired now. She's a very heavy gal, having some health problems right now. She joined the Bone Exchange Club.
Oh, okay.
And she hasn't been there for a few weeks because of some health issues. But Barb went as a guide or whatever. They got a name for him.
It's chaperone?
Chaperone or
Maybe
something
like that.
But anyway, she went as that, and she said you just cannot believe the outstanding experience that is. Especially, and of course you can't walk. If I went, I'd want to walk, but they'd still make me go in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. You got to be old to do that.
I say you were pretty spry. I'm looking at you motoring around this house. I'm impressed. So.
Well, you got to keep busy. You can't sit. I watch the news and television. Mm-hmm. Maybe reruns on Saturday night. But our television is very, very limited. My wife doesn't enjoy it either. Mm-hmm. And she's borderline right now on dementia.
Okay.
And they keep saying she's on maximum medication. They don't find a lot of change. Mm-hmm. But she doesn't remember where stuff's in the kitchen anymore and things like that. But she's here.
No, that's right. That's all that counts.
It's 66 years,
No, that's your partner.
All right. In fact, October will be 67.
Wow. That's nice. Okay. Well, anything I didn't cover that you want to add?
Well, I think I probably covered a lot more than you asked, but
that's how I like it. It lets you tell your story instead of me telling it for you.
There's so many different ones. You don't remember them all. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that probably is not what it used to be.
Exactly.
I got a good memory. It's just short.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's part of why I'm trying to get the younger guys to do this now too, while their memories are fresher.
Right.
But sometimes they're not ready to talk.
Yeah, I don't know what the date was on this. Did he put it on here? 2000.